Traditionally, multinationals are companies from the US and Europe that have developed a footprint that spans the whole world and mostly into Africa. The AfroChampions initiative wants to turn this trend around and highlight African companies that are growing first on the continent and then into the world. This morning in Hyde Park, they're going to be releasing the African Globalizers report. It's a public-private partnership that's co-chaired by Nigerian magnate Aliko Dangote and former President Thabo Mbeki. Desiree Chauke is at the breakfast. The African Globalizers report is compiled by Ghanaian advisory firm Confidants, showcasing an impressive group of homegrown African companies. Let's go to Desiree.
A very good morning, Leanne. Thank you so much for coming through to us. And the question we're asking this morning is, can African companies create their own global giants? This report looked at 30 companies with about 117 billion combined revenue. And we're talking now to Michael Kottoh, who's the managing partner at Confidants, and Dr Adzogenu is the co-chair of the African Champions. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Doctor, tell us, why was this project started?
The project came out of the understanding that African multinationals, through their cross-border operations, in the last 15 to 20 years, are basically integrating our financial and economic markets in a way that helps to consolidate our economy behind African multinational giants who have the potential to go global. We see that as very, very consequential to Africa's economic transformation, and we partnered Confidants to help develop the report. Against the backdrop that we see Africa as being a recipient of foreign direct investment, we think that there's an opportunity to share Africa's whose investment footprints are going into other global markets.
Michael, who are these 30 African giants who are getting into the global market, and what questions were you asking in your research?
Thank you. So, basically we were asking four main questions. We wanted to know which African companies are expanding their operations beyond the shores of Africa? Where in the world are they expanding into? And what's the prospect of these companies to grow into Africa's global giants? Now, if you look at the global Fortune 500 ranking of the world's biggest companies, there's not a single African company in it. China alone has more than 100 companies in that ranking. But if Africa is to emerge as a global powerhouse, it's important that Africa creates its own global giants. We need the African Samsung, we need the African Toyota, we need the African GE. How do we get there? So that was the purpose of the report. We wanted to see which African companies are getting close to achieving the status of global giants. And the findings are quite interesting. The 30 companies are operating in all global markets, in both emerging markets and in developed markets. In fact, the African globalizers have more footprint in developed markets than in emerging markets, which is quite remarkable. Between the 30 companies that we looked at, there is global footprint of more than 200. And 103 of those are in developed markets like Europe, like North America, like Australia, like New Zealand. But also in South America and Central America, and in Asia Pacific, we have a lot of activity by these African companies. And they come from all sectors, from industrials, from consumer, from telecom, from mining. We have African companies from all sectors that are emerging on the global stage. We think this is great, but the question is, how do we support these companies as a continent to really grow and become much, much bigger? Over 70% of the companies happen to be South African.
Oh, fantastic.
And that raises a concern, because South African companies alone cannot shoulder the responsibility
of the whole continent.
So how do we pick from the lessons and the successes of South African companies to support and share with companies from other parts of the continent, so they can also begin to go global?
Dr. Adzogenu, one of your chairmen, Mr. Aliko Dangote, is an example of how a company can branch into the entire continent and then start looking at the global market. But you also have former South African President Thabo Mbeki as your co-chair. What are these two individuals contributing to the narrative of this initiative?
I think our co-chairs, President Mbeki, has contributed as a president of South Africa through the Black Economic Empowerment Program, created African companies that were able to emerge to become Afro-champion companies, as we like to call them. Similar to Nigeria as well, with policies that President Obasanjo put in place, who happens to be one of our patrons as well. And that created the emergence of the Dangotes, the UBAs, the Zenith Banks, and among many others, the Sahara Group. So their contribution, I mean, AfroChampions is born out of the vision of those leaders in creating these African giants. Aliko Dangote's contribution has also been allowing us access to data, information about the challenges they face, because these are the kind of things you're not going to find anywhere, you know, in being able to, because Africa doesn't have a one-size-fits-all. There are 54 countries, and moving from one country to another, breaking language barriers, cultural barriers, regional barriers, the kind of challenges they face going into these markets are the kinds of information they've contributed to the kind of research we've done.
So what's going to be happening here today?
So we're launching the report today, and we're having an executive breakfast session with key industry leaders from South Africa. We have a lot of the companies that are featured in the report represented at the breakfast meeting. We want to have a big discussion on the theme, what would it take to create Africa's global giants? One of the findings from the report is we were trying to see the gap between the current African globalizers and the companies in the Fortune Global 500. What would it take for the African companies to break into that list? And we have some candidates. So from South Africa, the MTN Group, Sasol, are strong contenders. But what we find is that these two companies would need to double their revenues to be able to break.
And the market is there.
And the market is there.
Yeah.
But so what would it take? First of all, to help these current globalizers to break into the global giants list? And how can we create more African globalizers from other parts of the continent?
Gentlemen, we wish you well in your endeavor. Thank you so much for making the time this morning.
Thank you.
Michael Kottoh is the co-author of the report, and Dr. Adzogenu. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.